Mira wiped a bead of sweat from her brow, the oppressive heat of the attic making the task of sorting through her late grandmother's belongings almost unbearable. Dust motes swirled in the sunlight filtering through a cracked window, casting an eerie glow over the stacks of old boxes and forgotten heirlooms. She sighed, pushing aside a box of faded linens when her hand brushed against something cold and metallic. Curiosity piqued. She pulled out a peculiar object, a tarnished lamp with intricate designs etched into its surface. It felt heavier than it looked, its weight solid in her hands. Mira sat back on her heels, examining the artifact with a mixture of skepticism and intrigue. It reminded her of the tales her grandmother used to tell, stories of magic and wishes, of genies who could make dreams come true. She chuckled softly at the thought. Why not? She murmured to herself, rubbing the lamp with the sleeve of her shirt. The air in the attic shifted. A low, resonant hum filled the space, growing louder until it became a rush of wind that swirled around her. Mira stumbled backward, eyes wide as a plume of shimmering silver smoke erupted from the lamp, coalescing into a towering figure. As the smoke cleared, Mira found herself face to face with a man, if he could be called that. His form was both captivating and otherworldly, a blend of human elegance and bestial strength. Fox-like ears twitched atop his head, his long silver hair cascading over broad shoulders. His eyes, sharp and luminous, locked onto hers with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. His voice, deep and velvety, broke the silence. "You have summoned Ares, the Wishgranter," he said, his lips curling into a smirk. "State your desire, human, and I shall grant it." Mira blinked, her heart pounding. This had to be a dream, or maybe she was dehydrated from the heat. But the figure before her was undeniably real. She swallowed hard, her mind racing. What did she want? Money? Power? Stability? All seemed insignificant in the presence of this enigmatic being. Ares raised a brow, his expression shifting to one of mild impatience. Well, Mira hesitated for only a moment longer before a bold thought surfaced, one that had lingered in the back of her mind during many restless nights. "I want to experience something I've never felt before," she said, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "Show me the depths of pleasure unknown to humanity." Ares' smirk faltered, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. The confidence she exuded was a thin veil over her uncertainty, but her request intrigued him. "An unconventional wish," he murmured, circling her slowly. "Most wish for wealth or revenge." "You, however," his voice trailed off, a sly grin returning. "Very well. But know this. Once a wish is made, it cannot be undone." Mira nodded, her pulse quickening as he stepped closer. The air around them seemed to thrum with energy, the atmosphere charged with an almost tangible tension. Ares reached out, his clawed fingers brushing against her cheek. His touch was unexpectedly warm, his gaze piercing as if he could see into the very core of her being. "Close your eyes," he instructed, his voice a low, soothing command. Mira obeyed, her breath hitching as the world around her shifted. The dusty attic faded away, replaced by a vast, dreamlike expanse. She stood on a surface that shimmered like liquid silver, the sky above a swirling canvas of deep purples and golds. The air was thick with the scent of something sweet and intoxicating, and the sound of distant chimes echoed softly. Ares appeared before her, his presence more commanding in this ethereal realm. He reached for her hand, his grip firm yet gentle as he guided her closer. "Here, you will learn what it means to truly feel," he said, his voice a seductive whisper that sent a thrill down her spine. Their movements were slow, deliberate. Ares's other hand found her waist, his touch light but deliberate as he pulled her against him. Myra's breath caught, her senses heightened in a way she had never experienced before. Every brush of his fingers, every lingering glance, seemed to ignite a spark within her. Her hands moved tentatively, resting on his chest. She marveled at the contrast between the softness of his fur and the solid muscle beneath. Ares leaned in, his lips mere inches from her ear. "Are you afraid?" he asked, his breath warm against her skin. No, Mira replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. His lips curved into a smile, and he closed the distance between them. Their lips met, the kiss slow and deliberate, a blend of curiosity and unspoken promise. Myra's heart raced, her hands sliding up to his shoulders as she leaned into him. The kiss deepened, their connection growing stronger with each passing moment. The boundaries between their two worlds, between human and demi-human, seemed to blur. When they finally broke apart, Mira was breathless, her mind spinning. Ares gazed at her with an intensity that made her knees weak. This is only the beginning, he said, his voice laced with both warning and allure. The depths you seek will challenge you, Mira. Are you prepared to face them? She met his gaze, her resolve unwavering. Yes. Ares's expression softened, a hint of admiration flickering in his eyes. He stepped back, the dreamscape shifting once more. The shimmering ground beneath them rippled, and the sky darkened, stars appearing one by one. The atmosphere grew heavier, charged with anticipation. This journey is not without its dangers, Ares warned, his tone serious. The pleasure you seek comes with a price. You must trust me completely. Mira nodded, her determination unshaken. I trust you. Ares studied her for a moment before nodding. Then let us begin. As the world around them began to change, Mira felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Whatever lay ahead, she knew there was no turning back. The dreamscape shifted around Mira, the silvery ground beneath her feet giving way to a lush, moonlit forest. The air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and jasmine, and the sound of a gentle stream trickled nearby. She stood in awe, her senses heightened as every detail felt more vivid than reality. The soft rustle of leaves, the cool breeze on her skin, even the faint hum of energy that seemed to pulse through the ground, it all felt alive. Ares appeared beside her, his silver hair catching the light of the ethereal moon. His presence was magnetic, drawing her attention as he moved with a graceful, predatory confidence. His gaze lingered on her, intense and unreadable, as if he were assessing her every thought and emotion. Why bring me here? Mira asked, her voice quiet but steady. Ares stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. This place reflects your desires and fears, he said. It will test you, push you to confront what lies beneath the surface. His words sent a shiver down her spine, a mixture of anticipation and unease. And what happens if I fail? Ares's lips curled into a faint smile. Then you learn. But I don't intend to let you fail. He extended his hand, and after a brief hesitation, Mira placed hers in his. His touch was warm, his clawed fingers surprisingly gentle as they closed around hers. Together, they began to walk through the forest, the soft glow of the moonlight casting shifting patterns on the ground. As they moved deeper into the woods, the air grew warmer, the atmosphere heavier with unspoken tension. Ares stopped by a small clearing where the ground was covered in soft moss, the stream winding lazily past. He turned to Mira, his expression serious. Close your eyes again, he instructed. Mira hesitated, then complied, her trust in him solidifying despite the uncertainty of what was to come. She felt the gentle brush of his fingers along her jaw, tilting her head slightly upward. Focus on your senses, Ares said, his voice low and smooth. Feel, don't think. With her eyes closed, every sensation seemed amplified. She felt the warmth of his breath against her skin, the steady rise and fall of his chest as he moved closer. His hand rested lightly on her waist, the contact sending a subtle thrill through her. Slowly, his other hand traced the curve of her arm, his touch deliberate yet unhurried. Myra's pulse quickened, her breathing shallow as she concentrated on the sensations. His touch was unlike anything she had experienced, gentle yet commanding, as if he was carefully guiding her into a realm where every feeling carried deeper meaning. Her hands moved of their own accord, finding their way to his shoulders, her fingers exploring the contours of his form. The softness of his fur, the strength beneath it, fascinated her, a contrast that left her wanting more. Ares's voice broke the silence, a soft whisper that seemed to resonate within her. Tell me what you feel. Myra's lips parted, her voice barely above a breath. Warmth, strength, and something else. Good, Ares murmured, his tone carrying a note of approval. Now open your eyes. When she did, the world seemed sharper, more vivid. Ares stood close, his face inches from hers, his eyes glowing softly in the moonlight. For a moment, neither of them moved, the charged silence stretching between them. Then, without a word, Ares leaned in, capturing her lips in a kiss that was both tender and intense. Mira responded instinctively, her hands sliding up to the back of his neck as she pressed closer. The kiss deepened, their connection growing more urgent with each passing second. It was as if the world around them faded, leaving only the two of them bound together by the unspoken force that drew them closer. When they finally parted, Mira was breathless, her heart racing. Ares rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if grounding himself in the moment. "You're stronger than I expected," he said quietly. Mira smiled, a newfound confidence blooming within her. "You don't know everything about me yet." Ares chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that sent a pleasant warmth through her. "No, I suppose I don't, but I intend to." Their moment was interrupted by a sudden change in the atmosphere. The once calm forest grew still, an unnatural silence settling over it. Ares's expression hardened, his body tensing as his sharp gaze swept the area. "We're not alone," he said, his voice dropping to a cautious tone. Myra's heart leapt into her throat as she followed his gaze, but she saw nothing. "What is it?" Ares's grip on her waist tightened protectively. "A presence. One that shouldn't be here." Before Mira could respond, a shadow moved at the edge of the clearing. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall and imposing, with eyes that glowed an ominous red. The newcomer's form was similar to Ares's but darker, his features sharper and more menacing. "Well, well," the figure drawled, his voice like gravel. "Ares, you've been busy." Ares's jaw tightened. "Rohar." The tension between the two was palpable, the air thick with unspoken animosity. Mira could feel the energy crackling between them, her own fear mingling with a growing determination to stand her ground. Rohar's gaze shifted to Mira, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "And who is this?" "A fragile human, caught in something she doesn't understand." Mira felt a surge of defiance, but Ares stepped in front of her, shielding her from Rohar's view. "Leave her out of this," he said, his voice cold and commanding. "She has nothing to do with you." Rohar chuckled darkly. "Oh, but she does now. You've broken the rules, Ares. Bringing a human into this realm, binding her to your power, it's dangerous." Ares didn't waver. "She made her wish. It's my duty to fulfill it." Rohar's smirk widened. "Then I suppose I'll have to see how far you're willing to go to protect her." Without warning, Rohar lunged, his movements swift and predatory. Ares met him head-on, their clash sending a shockwave through the clearing. Mira stumbled back, her heart pounding as the two demihumans fought with a ferocity that blurred the line between beast and man. Though fear coursed through her, Myra's eyes remained fixed on Ares. She could see the raw power in his every move, the determination to protect her at any cost. It was in that moment she realized how deeply their connection had already grown, and how much more there was to uncover. The battle raged on, and Mira knew this was only the beginning of the challenges they would face together. The clearing was still once more, the moonlight casting a pale glow over the moss-covered ground. Rohar had retreated, his ominous promise lingering in the air like a chilling echo. Mira stood in silence, her pulse racing, as Ares watched the shadows where his rival had disappeared. His stance was tense, every muscle coiled as though ready to strike again at a moment's notice. Finally, he turned to her, his expression softening only slightly. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. Mira shook her head, though her hands trembled at her sides. "No, I'm fine." Her voice wavered despite her best efforts to sound calm. "Who was that?" Ares exhaled, his shoulders relaxing just enough to reveal the weight of the confrontation. Rohar, he said grimly, a rival from long ago. He's been seeking a way to break my bond with this realm, but his methods are less honorable. Mira frowned, her mind racing. He knew about me. He called me a weakness. Ares's gaze darkened, his jaw tightening. He's wrong, he said firmly, stepping closer. You're not a weakness, Mira. You're the reason I'm stronger now. His words sent a wave of warmth through her, but the danger Rohar posed still loomed in her thoughts. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. What does he want? To control what I am, Ares replied. To take the power that binds me to this realm and twist it for his own gain. And now that he knows about you, he'll see you as leverage. Myra's stomach nodded, but she refused to let fear dictate her actions. Then we won't let him. I'm not going to be a pawn in his game. Ares's lips curved into a faint smile, a glimmer of admiration in his eyes. You're braver than most who find themselves here. She met his gaze, her resolve hardening. We'll face him together. Ares reached out, his hand brushing against her cheek in a gesture that was both reassuring and intimate. Together, he agreed. His thumb traced a gentle line along her jaw before he pulled away, his focus returning to the task at hand. But for now, we need to prepare. Rohar won't wait long before making his next move. Mira nodded, her mind already racing with questions. How do we do that? Ares gestured for her to follow as he led her deeper into the forest. The trees grew denser, their branches weaving together to form a natural canopy that seemed to hum with energy. They eventually reached a secluded glade where the air felt heavier, charged with the same magic that had drawn Mira to Ares in the first place. This place will help you strengthen your connection to this realm, Ares explained, his voice steady. It will allow you to harness the bond we share. Mira glanced around, her curiosity piqued. What do I need to do? Ares stepped closer, his presence both comforting and commanding. Trust me, he said softly, his hands finding hers. Let me guide you. She nodded, her heart pounding as he led her to the center of the glade. The ground beneath them seemed to pulse with a quiet rhythm, mirroring the beat of her own heart. Ares positioned her hands on his chest, her fingers splaying out over the warmth of his skin. She could feel the steady rise and fall of his breath, the strength that lay beneath the surface. Close your eyes, he murmured, his voice a gentle command. Mira obeyed, letting her other senses take over. She felt the warmth of his hands as they settled on her waist, his touch grounding her. The energy of the glade seemed to flow between them, a current that grew stronger with each passing moment. Ares's voice was low, almost a whisper, as he guided her through the connection. Focus on the bond we share, he said. Feel the energy that ties us together. Let it guide you. Mira concentrated, her breathing slowing as she tuned into the flow of magic between them. It was like a dance, their movements subtle but synchronized. She could feel the power of the realm around her, its pulse growing stronger as she leaned into the connection. Ares's touch became more deliberate, his hands sliding up her arms in a slow, deliberate motion. The warmth of his skin against her sent a shiver through her, but it wasn't fear. It was a deep, unspoken understanding. Myra's hands moved instinctively, her fingers tracing the contours of his shoulders as she explored the boundaries of their connection. Their closeness was intoxicating, every touch and movement charged with unspoken emotion. Myra's heart raced, her pulse quickening as she felt Ares's breath against her cheek. His hands found their way back to her waist, pulling her closer until there was barely any space between them. Mira, Ares murmured, his voice filled with something she couldn't quite name. It was both a warning and a plea, a reminder of the line they were treading. But Mira didn't pull away. Instead, she opened her eyes, meeting his gaze with unwavering determination. I'm not afraid, she said softly, her voice steady. Ares's expression shifted, a mixture of admiration and something deeper. He leaned in, his lips brushing against hers in a kiss that was both tender and powerful. Mira responded without hesitation, her hands sliding up to cup his face as their connection deepened. The kiss was a culmination of everything they had shared so far: the trust, the vulnerability, the unspoken bond that tied them together. When they finally broke apart, Mira was breathless, her heart pounding in her chest. Ares rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if grounding himself in the moment. "You're stronger than I ever could have imagined," he said quietly. Mira smiled, her confidence bolstered by his words. "We're stronger together." Ares nodded, a hint of a smile on his lips. "Yes, and together, we'll face whatever comes next." The energy of the glade seemed to pulse in agreement, a quiet promise of the challenges and triumphs that lay ahead. Mira knew their journey was far from over, but for the first time, she felt truly ready to face whatever the future held. The glade remained still, its quiet hum of energy gradually subsiding as Ares and Mira pulled apart. The warmth of their connection lingered in the air, a reminder of the bond they had just strengthened. Myra's heart still raced, her body attuned to every subtle shift in the atmosphere. Ares's gaze held hers, a mixture of pride and caution in his eyes. "You're attuned to the magic now," he said softly, his voice steady but tinged with an undercurrent of seriousness. "The bond between us will help you sense threats, even before they appear." Mira nodded, the weight of his words settling over her. The encounter with Rohar earlier had been a stark reminder of the dangers they faced. Yet, despite the looming threat, she felt a growing confidence, a belief that together they could overcome whatever lay ahead. Ares stepped back, his hand lingering on her arm for a moment longer before he let go. "There's more to learn," he continued, his tone shifting to a more practical one. "We need to be ready for anything." Mira followed as he led her out of the glade and back into the dense forest. The path they walked was different this time, narrower and more winding. The trees grew taller, their branches intertwining overhead to form a canopy that filtered the moonlight into fragmented beams. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of earth and foliage. They eventually reached a small clearing where a crystal clear pond reflected the sky above. Ares knelt by the water's edge, motioning for Mira to join him. "This pond holds a reflection of your inner self," he explained, his voice calm but firm. "It will show you your strengths and your vulnerabilities. Both are equally important." Mira crouched beside him, peering into the water. At first, she saw only her reflection, her face framed by the soft glow of the moonlight. But as she focused, the image began to shift. She saw flashes of herself in moments of courage and determination, standing firm against challenges. Then, the scenes darkened, revealing moments of doubt and fear, times when she had felt lost or unsure of her place in the world. Her chest tightened as the images faded, replaced once more by her reflection. "It's a lot to take in," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Ares placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding her. "Strength doesn't mean the absence of fear," he said gently. "It means facing it, understanding it, and using it to grow." Mira looked up at him, finding comfort in his steady presence. "Have you done this?" she asked, gesturing to the pond. Ares's expression softened, a hint of vulnerability flickering in his eyes. "Long ago," he said. "It's not an easy journey, but it's necessary." Mira took a deep breath, the weight of his words sinking in. She turned her attention back to the pond, determined to embrace what she had seen. The fear and doubt were part of her, but they didn't define her. She was stronger now, and she wouldn't let her past hold her back. They sat in silence for a while, the gentle ripple of the pond the only sound. The quiet moment gave Mira a chance to reflect, to process the emotions that had surfaced. Ares remained beside her, his presence a steady source of reassurance. Eventually, he stood, offering her a hand to help her up. "Come," he said. "There's one more place I want to show you." Mira took his hand, rising to her feet. They continued their journey through the forest, the path growing steeper as they ascended a small hill. At the top, they emerged onto a rocky outcrop that overlooked the entire forest. The view was breathtaking, the vast expanse of trees stretching out beneath them, bathed in the soft light of the moon. Ares stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "This is where I come to center myself," he said quietly, "to remind myself of what I'm fighting for." Mira followed his gaze, the beauty of the landscape filling her with a sense of calm. She could see why this place was important to him. It was a reminder of the connection between their world and the magic that sustained it. She glanced at Ares, studying his profile in the moonlight. There was a quiet strength in him, a resilience that she admired. Yet, there was also a hint of sadness, a weight he carried that she didn't fully understand. "Thank you for sharing this with me," she said, her voice soft. Ares turned to her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You've earned it," he replied. "You're stronger than you realize, Mira." His words warmed her, and for a moment, they simply stood together, taking in the view. The bond between them felt stronger than ever, a quiet understanding passing between them without the need for words. But the peaceful moment was short lived. The air around them grew heavy, a familiar sense of unease settling over the hilltop. Ares's expression hardened, his eyes scanning the forest below. "He's close," Ares said, his tone low and tense. Myra's heart quickened as she followed his gaze. "Rohar." Ares nodded, his jaw set. "He won't stop until he gets what he wants." Mira clenched her fists, her determination solidifying. "Then we'll stop him." Ares looked at her, a spark of pride in his eyes. Together. The tension between them was palpable as they prepared for the battle ahead. The serene beauty of the forest seemed almost fragile in the face of the danger that loomed. But Mira felt ready. She had faced her fears, embraced her strengths, and deepened her bond with Ares. Whatever came next, she knew they would face it as one. As the first hint of movement stirred in the shadows below, Mira squared her shoulders, her resolve unwavering. The fight was coming, and she was ready. The forest below seemed to hold its breath, the usual chorus of nocturnal life falling silent as a heavy tension settled over the landscape. Mira could feel the weight of it pressing against her chest, a visceral reminder of the confrontation that was drawing near. Ares stood at her side, his sharp gaze scanning the shadows below, every muscle in his body coiled and ready for action. "Stay close," Ares said, his voice low but firm. His hand briefly brushed hers, a fleeting but reassuring gesture. Mira nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure what to expect from Rohar's next move, but she knew she couldn't afford to hesitate. She had come too far, grown too much, to let fear hold her back now. The faint rustle of leaves reached their ears, followed by a low, guttural growl that echoed through the trees. Ares's ears twitched, his posture shifting as he stepped forward, placing himself protectively between Mira and the approaching threat. From the shadows emerged Rohar, his form imposing and more beastly than before. His crimson eyes glowed with an unsettling intensity, and a cruel smirk played on his lips. He moved with predatory confidence, his claws glinting in the pale light as he slowly circled the pair. "Still protecting your little human, I see," Rohar drawled, his tone dripping with disdain. "How touching." Ares's expression remained stoic, but Mira could sense the tension radiating from him. "You're wasting your time, Rohar," Ares said coldly. "You won't take her, and you won't take what doesn't belong to you." Rohar's smirk widened, his gaze shifting to Mira. "Oh, but she's already a part of this," he said. "You've bound her to this realm, tied her fate to yours. Do you think she can withstand what's coming?" Myra's pulse quickened, but she refused to show weakness. She stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear that simmered beneath the surface. "I'm stronger than you think," she said, meeting Rohar's gaze with unwavering resolve. "You won't scare me off." Rohar chuckled darkly, his amusement evident. "Bold," he remarked, his tone mocking. "But bravery won't save you." Without warning, Rohar lunged, his movements a blur as he closed the distance between them. Ares met him head-on, their clash sending a shockwave through the clearing. Mira stumbled back, her heart racing as the two demi-humans engaged in a fierce battle. Ares fought with precision and power, his every move calculated to counter Rohar's brutal attacks. The sound of claws meeting and the occasional roar of defiance filled the air, a chaotic symphony of strength and fury. Mira watched in awe and terror, her instincts screaming at her to run, but her resolve keeping her rooted in place. She couldn't abandon Ares, not now, not ever. The fight raged on, each blow shaking the ground beneath their feet. Myra's gaze darted around the clearing, her mind racing as she searched for any way to help. The bond between her and Ares pulsed faintly, a reminder of their connection, their shared strength. Then she saw it, an opportunity. Rohar's focus was entirely on Ares, his back briefly turned to her. Summoning her courage, Mira moved swiftly, grabbing a nearby branch that had fallen during the skirmish. It wasn't much, but it was solid and sharp at one end. Clutching the branch tightly, she positioned herself behind Rohar, her movements as quiet as possible. Her heart pounded in her ears, every step bringing her closer to the beast that threatened everything she had come to care about. Ares caught her movement out of the corner of his eye, his gaze briefly meeting hers. Understanding flickered in his expression, and he subtly shifted his stance, driving Rohar back just enough to give Mira the opening she needed. With a surge of determination, Mira struck, driving the sharp end of the branch into Rohar's side. The beast let out a roar of pain and surprise, stumbling as he twisted to face her. Mira quickly backed away, her grip on the branch tightening. You, Rohar snarled, his crimson eyes blazing with fury. You'll regret that. But before he could move, Ares was on him again, his attacks relentless. This time, the advantage was clear. Rohar was weakened, his movements slower and less precise. Ares didn't let up, his claws finding purchase as he forced Rohar further back. Finally, with one last powerful strike, Ares sent Rohar sprawling to the ground. The beast lay there, breathing heavily, his crimson eyes dimmed but still burning with defiance. Ares stood over him, his chest rising and falling with exertion. Leave, he commanded, his voice cold and unyielding. If you come back, I won't show mercy. Rohar bared his teeth, his growl low and dangerous. But after a tense moment, he began to retreat, disappearing into the shadows with a final, venomous glare. The forest seemed to release its held breath, the tension lifting as silence returned. Mira let out a shaky breath, her knees threatening to give way as the adrenaline began to fade. Ares turned to her, his expression softening as he closed the distance between them. You did well, he said, his voice low but filled with pride. Mira managed a small smile, her hands still trembling. I couldn't just stand by, she said. I had to do something. Ares reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. His touch was warm, grounding her in the aftermath of the battle. You were brave, he said softly, and you proved that our bond makes us stronger. Mira leaned into his touch, her eyes meeting his. We're stronger together, she echoed, her voice steady. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of what they had just faced settling over them. The bond between them pulsed faintly, a quiet reassurance that they were not alone. Ares finally lowered his hand, his gaze still fixed on hers. This isn't over, he said. Rohar will return, and we need to be ready. Mira nodded, her resolve unwavering. We will be, she said. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Ares's lips curved into a faint smile, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. Together, he agreed. The night around them seemed to settle, the forest once again a place of quiet strength. But both Mira and Ares knew that the peace was temporary. The fight was far from over, and the challenges ahead would test their bond in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The forest was quiet in the days following Rohar's retreat, but the peace was fragile, a tension humming beneath the surface. Mira and Ares remained vigilant, knowing it was only a matter of time before Rohar returned. Each moment felt borrowed, yet they used the time to grow closer, sharpening their bond and preparing for what lay ahead. They spent their nights beneath the stars, the cool breeze carrying the faint scent of jasmine as they rested beside the crackling fire. Mira often found herself gazing at Ares, marveling at the balance of strength and gentleness he carried so effortlessly. Despite the danger that surrounded them, his presence had become her sanctuary. One evening, as the firelight flickered against the surrounding trees, Ares turned to Mira, his expression thoughtful. "You've changed," he said softly, his eyes studying her. "There's a strength in you now that wasn't there before." Mira smiled faintly, poking at the fire with a stick. "I guess I've had to adapt," she said. "Being here, facing all of this, it's shown me what I'm capable of." Ares's gaze lingered on her, a warmth in his eyes that sent a pleasant shiver down her spine. "You've done more than adapt," he said. "You've thrived." The compliment caught her off guard, and she felt her cheeks warm under his steady gaze. "It helps having someone like you by my side," she admitted. "You've taught me more than I could have imagined." Ares leaned closer, the firelight casting a soft glow on his features. "We've taught each other," he said, his voice low. His hand reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his touch lingering just a moment longer than necessary. Myra's breath hitched, her heart beating faster as she met his gaze. There was an intensity in his eyes, a depth of emotion that made her pulse quicken. Slowly, as if drawn by an unseen force, Ares leaned in, his face mere inches from hers. "Are you afraid?" he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Mira shook her head, her voice steady despite the rapid beat of her heart. "No." Ares's lips curved into a faint smile before he closed the distance between them. Their lips met in a slow, deliberate kiss, the world around them fading into the background. Mira felt her hands move instinctively, sliding up to rest against his chest, where she could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. The kiss deepened, their connection growing stronger with each passing moment. Mira lost herself in the sensation, the warmth of his touch, the way his hands gently cradled her face. It was as if every barrier between them had fallen away, leaving only the unspoken bond they had built together. When they finally pulled apart, Mira was breathless, her heart racing. Ares rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if grounding himself in the moment. "You mean more to me than I ever thought possible," he said quietly. Myra's chest tightened at his words, a mixture of emotions welling up inside her. "And you mean everything to me," she replied, her voice soft but unwavering. For a while, they simply sat together, the crackling fire providing a comforting backdrop to their quiet exchange. But the peace was short-lived. A sudden gust of wind rustled the trees, carrying with it an ominous chill that made Myra's skin prickle. Ares stiffened, his head snapping up as his ears twitched. "He's coming," he said, his voice low and tense. Mira felt her stomach knot, but she pushed the fear aside. They had known this moment would come. Rising to her feet, she grabbed her makeshift weapon, a sturdy branch sharpened to a fine point, and took her place beside Ares. The wind grew stronger, the fire flickering wildly as the shadows deepened. From the darkness emerged Rohar, his form even more monstrous than before. His crimson eyes burned with malice, and his presence seemed to suck the very warmth from the air. "You thought you could hide," Rohar snarled, his voice a guttural growl. "But I've always known where to find you." Ares stepped forward, his claws glinting in the firelight. "You should have stayed gone, Rohar," he said coldly. "This time you won't leave." Rohar chuckled darkly, his claws flexing. "We'll see about that." The battle erupted without warning, a flurry of motion as Ares and Rohar clashed once more. Their strikes were fast and brutal, the ground shaking beneath their feet as they fought with relentless ferocity. Mira watched, her grip tightening on her weapon as she waited for her moment. The fight was more intense than before, each blow landing with bone-shaking force. Ares fought with a precision and strength that left Mira in awe, but Rohar's determination was equally formidable. The clearing was filled with the sounds of their struggle, the roar of defiance, and the sharp clash of claws against claws. Finally, Mira saw her chance. As Rohar lunged at Ares, his back momentarily exposed, she darted forward. With all her strength, she drove the sharpened branch into Rohar's side, the impact causing him to stumble. Rohar let out a roar of pain and rage, his claws swiping wildly. Mira narrowly avoided his strike, stumbling back as Ares pressed the attack. With renewed determination, Ares delivered a powerful blow, sending Rohar crashing to the ground. Panting heavily, Rohar struggled to rise, his crimson eyes flickering. Ares stood over him, his claws poised for a final strike. "It's over," he said, his voice like steel. "Leave now, or face the end." For a moment, Rohar remained motionless, his growl low and guttural. But then, slowly, he began to retreat, his form fading into the shadows. His parting glare was filled with hatred, but he said nothing as he disappeared into the night. The clearing fell silent once more, the tension easing as the wind died down. Mira lowered her weapon, her legs threatening to give out beneath her as the adrenaline ebbed. Ares turned to her, his expression softening as he reached out to steady her. "You were incredible," he said, his voice filled with pride. Mira managed a tired smile, leaning into his touch. "We did it together." Ares nodded, his gaze warm. "And together, we'll face whatever comes next." The fire crackled softly behind them, a reminder that their journey was far from over. But for now, they had won, and that was enough. The fire's glow dwindled as dawn began to break, casting a soft light over the forest. Mira and Ares sat together, their breaths slowing as the tension of the night faded. Though Rohar had been driven back, the weight of his looming presence remained, a constant reminder that their fight was far from over. Ares watched the horizon, his expression distant, his sharp features outlined by the early morning light. Mira could see the fatigue in his eyes, but beneath it was a resolve that mirrored her own. She placed a hand on his arm, her touch gentle. "We can't keep doing this," she said quietly. "We need to end it." Ares turned to her, his gaze softening. "I know," he replied, "but to do that, we need more than strength. We need to break the cycle that binds Rohar to this realm." Mira frowned, her mind racing. "What do you mean?" Ares's expression grew more serious. "Rohar and I are connected through the magic of this realm," he explained. "He's drawn to it just as I am. As long as that connection exists, he'll keep coming back." Mira felt a chill run down her spine. "Then how do we break it?" Ares hesitated, his gaze dropping for a moment before he spoke. "There's a way," he said, "but it requires a sacrifice, a wish that would sever the bond between us and the realm." Myra's breath caught. She knew the weight of what he was saying, the magnitude of the choice they faced. "And what happens to you if we do that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ares looked at her, his eyes filled with a quiet determination. "If the wish is strong enough, it will set me free," he said. "But it will also make me mortal. I would lose my connection to the magic, to everything that's kept me bound here." Myra's heart ached at the thought. She had seen the power that flowed through Ares, the way it defined him, made him who he was. To give that up would be to change everything. "You'd lose so much," she said softly. Ares reached out, his hand cupping her cheek. "But I'd gain something far more important," he said, his voice steady. "A chance to truly be with you, without the shadow of this realm hanging over us." Mira leaned into his touch, her heart swelling with emotion. The thought of a life together, free from the constant threat of Rohar, was more than she had dared to hope for. But the cost was great, and the decision wasn't one she could make lightly. "What do we need to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling within her. Ares smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and gratitude in his eyes. "We need to find the heart of the realm," he said. "It's where the magic is strongest, and where the wish will have the power to break the bond." Mira nodded, her resolve solidifying. "Then let's do it." They spent the next few hours preparing for the journey. Ares led the way, guiding Mira through the dense forest as the morning sun rose higher in the sky. The air grew heavier the closer they got, the magic of the realm palpable, thrumming beneath their feet. Finally, they arrived at a clearing unlike any Mira had seen before. At its center stood a massive tree, its bark shimmering with an otherworldly light. Its roots twisted and spiraled outward, anchoring it firmly to the ground. The air around the tree was thick with energy, a soft hum resonating in the stillness. "This is it," Ares said, his voice low. the heart of the realm. Mira stared in awe, the sheer power of the place making her feel both small and significant. She turned to Ares, her heart pounding. What do we do now? Ares took her hands in his grip firm but gentle. You need to make the wish, he said. It has to come from you, someone unbound by the realm's magic. Wish for our bond to be severed, and for me to be freed from this place. Myra's throat tightened, the gravity of the moment weighing on her. She looked into Ares's eyes, finding strength in his unwavering gaze. Taking a deep breath, she closed her eyes and focused on the wish that had grown in her heart. I wish for Ares to be free, she said, her voice clear and strong. For our bond to break, and for him to live as he chooses. The air around them shifted, the hum of energy growing louder. The light from the tree intensified, bathing the clearing in a radiant glow. Mira felt the magic surge around her, a powerful force that seemed to envelop her and Ares in its embrace. Ares tightened his grip on her hands, his eyes glowing with a mixture of pain and relief as the magic took hold. It's working, he said, his voice strained. Stay with me. Mira nodded, her own grip firm as she held onto him. The light grew brighter, the hum reaching a crescendo. She could feel the bond between them shifting, the magic that had tied them to the realm slowly unraveling. Then, with a final pulse of energy, the light began to fade. The hum quieted, leaving the clearing in a serene stillness. Mira opened her eyes, her heart pounding as she looked at Ares. He stood before her, his form unchanged but his presence different. The glow in his eyes had dimmed, replaced by a warmth that felt more human. He reached out, his hand finding hers. It's done, he said, his voice quiet but filled with a deep sense of peace. The bond is broken. Mira felt a wave of relief wash over her, tears welling in her eyes. She threw her arms around him, holding him tightly as the weight of the journey finally lifted. We did it, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Ares held her close, his arms wrapping around her. We did, he said softly. As they stood together, the heart of the realm continued to glow softly behind them, a silent witness to their triumph. Though the road ahead was uncertain, Mira and Ares knew they had forged a path together, one built on trust, sacrifice, and an unbreakable bond. The clearing remained bathed in the soft glow of the ancient tree, its energy now calm and subdued, as if in quiet acknowledgement of the wish that had just reshaped the bond between Mira and Ares. The air was still, the hum of magic replaced by a serene silence. Mira leaned into Ares's embrace, her heart pounding in the aftermath of the powerful ritual. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of what they had done settled over them, a mixture of relief and uncertainty. Ares's hands rested gently on her back, his touch grounding her as she processed the enormity of the sacrifice they had made. His presence felt different now, more human, more fragile, but it was still him, still the steady force she had come to rely on. Ares finally broke the silence, his voice low but steady. It's over, he said, his words carrying a mixture of finality and quiet wonder. The bond is gone. Mira pulled back slightly, just enough to look up at him. His silver eyes, once glowing with the magic of the realm, now held a softer light. She reached up, her fingers gently tracing the line of his jaw. How do you feel? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ares considered the question for a moment before answering. Lighter, he said. Like a weight I've carried for centuries has finally lifted. He paused, a faint smile tugging at his lips. But there's also a new kind of weight, one that's grounding. Mira returned his smile, understanding what he meant. They were no longer bound by the magic of the realm, but by something far more profound, a connection forged through their shared journey and the choices they had made together. She stepped back, her gaze sweeping across the clearing. The ancient tree stood as a silent sentinel, its soft glow illuminating the surrounding forest. The air felt different now, less charged with magic and more natural. It was as if the realm itself was shifting, adapting to the changes they had set in motion. Ares watched her closely, his expression thoughtful. The realm will adjust, he said. as if reading her thoughts. Without me bound to it, the magic will flow differently, but it will survive. Mira nodded, the reassurance easing the lingering worry in her chest. And Rohar, she asked, her voice quiet. Ares's expression darkened slightly. He'll feel the change too, he said. Without our bond anchoring him, his connection to the realm will weaken. He won't be able to return as easily, if at all. The knowledge brought Mira a sense of relief, but also a lingering caution. Rohar's threat had been driven back, but she knew they couldn't afford to let their guard down completely. Still, for the first time in what felt like ages, the path ahead seemed clearer. They stood in silence for a while, taking in the tranquility of the clearing. The soft rustling of leaves and the distant chirping of birds created a soothing backdrop, a reminder of the life that thrived beyond their struggles. Finally, Ares turned to her, his hand gently taking hers. We should leave this place, he said. There's nothing more for us here. Mira hesitated for a moment, her gaze lingering on the ancient tree. It had been the center of so much, both the source of their struggle and the key to their freedom. She felt a strange sense of gratitude toward it, as if it had played a silent role in guiding them. With a final nod, she turned back to Ares. You're right, she said. It's time to move forward. Hand in hand, they left the clearing, the soft glow of the tree gradually fading behind them. The forest felt different now, more alive, as if it too was breathing a sigh of relief. The path they followed was familiar, but the weight of the realm's magic no longer pressed against them. As they walked, Mira felt a growing sense of anticipation. The world beyond the forest awaited them, a world where they could forge a new life together, free from the constraints of magic and ancient bonds. They eventually reached the edge of the forest, where the trees gave way to open fields bathed in the warm light of the setting sun. Mira paused, taking in the sight. It was a reminder of how far they had come and how much lay ahead. Ares stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the horizon. This is just the beginning, he said quietly. Our beginning. Mira turned to him, her heart swelling with a mixture of hope and determination. Whatever comes next, she said, her voice steady. We'll face it together. Ares nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. Together, he echoed. They stood there for a moment, the sun casting a golden glow over the fields. The challenges they had faced had forged a bond that went beyond magic, beyond the realm. It was a bond built on trust, sacrifice, and the unshakable connection between two souls who had chosen each other against all odds. Mira felt a sense of peace settle over her. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid. With Ares by her side, she knew they could face anything. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they began their journey anew, stepping into the unknown with hearts full of hope and the promise of a future they would build together. The days after their departure from the heart of their realm were filled with quiet exploration and moments of reflection. Mira and Ares journeyed through rolling fields and dense woods, each step taking them farther from the magical forest and closer to a new life. The weight of their past struggles lingered, but it was tempered by the lightness of their newfound freedom. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, they came upon a small, serene lake nestled in a valley. Its surface shimmered like glass, reflecting the fading light. The quiet beauty of the scene drew them in, and they decided to make camp along its shores. Mira knelt by the water's edge, trailing her fingers through the cool surface. The stillness of the lake mirrored the peace she felt inside, a rare calm after the storm of their journey. Ares approached, his footsteps silent on the soft grass. He settled beside her, his presence grounding as always. This feels different, Mira said softly, her gaze fixed on the rippling water. For the first time, it feels like we're not just running or fighting. We're living. Ares nodded, his silver eyes reflecting the dying light. It's a new beginning, he said. We've earned this peace. Mira smiled, the warmth of his words settling over her. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching as the stars began to emerge, their light dancing on the lake surface. The world around them seemed to hold its breath, as if granting them this quiet moment of reprieve. Eventually, Ares reached out, his hand brushing against hers. Mira turned to him, her heart skipping a beat at the softness in his gaze. Without a word, he lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The simple gesture spoke volumes, a silent promise of devotion and gratitude. Myra's cheeks flushed, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she shifted closer, her free hand resting lightly on his arm. "We've come so far," she murmured. "And yet, it still feels like there's so much ahead of us." Ares smiled, his fingers intertwining with hers. "That's what makes it worth it," he said. "Every step forward is ours to take together." Their eyes met, and in that moment, the rest of the world seemed to fade away. Mira leaned in, her lips brushing against his in a soft, lingering kiss. Ares responded with a quiet intensity, his hand cupping her cheek as he deepened the kiss. It was a kiss filled with unspoken words, a connection that went beyond the physical. When they finally parted, Mira rested her forehead against his, her eyes fluttering shut. "I never imagined feeling this way," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Ares's thumb gently traced the line of her jaw. "You are," he said. "We both are." They stayed like that for a while, the quiet sounds of the lake and the night enveloping them. It was a moment of pure connection, unburdened by the past or the uncertainty of the future. As the night deepened, they set up their camp, the soft glow of the fire casting flickering shadows on the ground. Mira lay on her back, staring up at the canopy of stars, her thoughts drifting. Ares sat beside her, his gaze similarly fixed on the sky. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" Mira asked, breaking the silence. Ares glanced down at her, his expression thoughtful. "I think about the life we'll build," he said. "A life where we're not defined by the past, but by the choices we make now." Mira nodded, her lips curving into a small smile. "I like the sound of that." Ares lay down beside her, his hand finding hers once more. "Whatever we face, we'll face it together," he said. "That's all that matters." Mira turned her head to look at him, her heart swelling with affection. "Together," she echoed. The fire crackled softly, its warmth a comforting presence as they drifted into a peaceful silence. The stars above seemed to shine brighter, as if celebrating the quiet strength of their bond. As the days turned into weeks, Mira and Ares continued their journey, each new day bringing them closer to a life they could call their own. They discovered small villages where Mira marveled at the simplicity of human life, and Ares, though cautious, began to integrate himself into this new world. They found joy in the mundane, in shared meals, in laughter, and in the quiet moments of simply being together. Their connection deepened with each passing day, the trust and love they had built serving as a foundation for their future. One evening, they arrived at a small, welcoming village nestled in a valley much like the one with the lake. The villagers were kind, offering them a place to stay and work. Mira found herself drawn to the community, the warmth and simplicity of the people reminding her of what she had always longed for, a home. Ares, too, seemed to find solace in the village. Though his otherworldly presence was undeniable, the villagers accepted him, recognizing the goodness in his heart. For the first time in his long existence, Ares felt a sense of belonging that went beyond duty or obligation. Together, Mira and Ares began to build a life in the village. They worked side by side, their days filled with purpose and their nights with quiet intimacy. The shadows of their past gradually faded, replaced by the light of a future they had forged together. One evening, as they stood on the hill overlooking the village, Ares turned to Mira, his expression filled with quiet wonder. "This is what I wished for," he said softly. "A life with you. A home." Mira smiled, her eyes shining with emotion. "It's everything I've ever wanted," she said. "And it's just the beginning." As they stood together, the village lights twinkling below and the stars shining above, Mira knew that their journey had led them exactly where they were meant to be. The future stretched out before them, filled with endless possibilities and the unshakable bond they shared.